Thank you guys for coming. I know a couple of you were here last year. Anyone, if you could raise your hand if you were here last year. Okay, good. All right, so we're going to start the presentation with a little illustration, really, of why you really need the right people helping you when it comes time to financing. Even some of the things we think we know may not always be true. We have two deals here. Bank A, two $2 million loans, 10-year term, 30-year amortization. Bank A has a rate of 3.94%, and Bank B has a rate of 4%. So you see, as you would expect, Bank A is $69 cheaper per month, right? It's in the Bank B because it's a cost. So Bank B costs $69 a month more, $829 a year more, and $8,286 over the term more than Bank A. So can anyone think of a reason why you would take Bank A over Bank B? Excellent. There's a concept in finance. It's a concept of interest calculation, of how interest is calculated. In the old days, before computers, calculating interest on an actual number of 365 days or 366 days was way too complicated without computers. So what the banks did was they considered a mortgage year to be 12 30-day months. So therefore, every year is the same number of days, calculating the interest, calculating the amortization, which is also more spiritual than financial. I mean, I don't still know how they do that. It was much easier than dealing with the actual number of days, where every month is different, every year, so every year is different. Computers allowed them to recalculate interest based on the actual number of days. It's called actual 360. 365 divided by 360 is how you usurp the extra 5 or 6 days of interest that they charge you, and it's a little sneaky. I mean, it's because they don't really explain it. So if you compare a loan of actual 360 that's charging you 5 or 6 in a leap year, it's 6 days of interest more per year than on the 360, you will see that, yeah, the payments are cheaper with the lower rate, but your balance at the end of the term is going to be a lot higher because your payments were more interest than principal. On the 360, your payments paid a lot more principal than on the actual 360. So the net is Bank B, even though it's 6 basis points higher, is actually the better deal for your co-op. Remember that, although there won't be a test. Okay, we're Meridian Capital Group. The reason that we're giving this seminar is because we've been in business 26 years. We have gotten to a point in the commercial finance world where we finance really more multifamily properties in the country than anyone else. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've averaged $36 billion a year of commercial real estate finance, of all different types of commercial real estate. That's about $3 billion a month. Of that, about 70% is still multifamily. And our group, we focus on co-ops, and the company as a whole averages about $1 billion a year of underlying co-op loans. And that $1 billion a year would be infomercial worthy. In any other company than Meridian, where we get lost, $1 billion is a good week and a half at the company. But in the co-op world, it's obviously very meaningful. We calculate that we do about 68% to 70% of all co-ops financed gets financed through Meridian, so we finance more than everybody else combined. I'm going to let you, this is all in the books that you're going to get, so you could just go through our history, 27 years at this point. We have offices across the country. We will close loans. You see that we've been rated very highly by the trade magazines. Just in the last 3 years, we've closed 10,000 loans, more than 10,000 loans, which is 12 closings every day. And the numbers are just incredible. $100 billion in the last 3 years. Anyway, you could take a look at that. So the point, okay, I was explaining to someone, the reason this benefits you and not just Meridian is, and the difference between, I've been with the company this is going on 22 years, is 22 years ago, a broker would talk to a co-op and say, you want to borrow $3 million, so we would go to 4 banks, and what's your rate for a $3 million loan for 10 years? Give me the rate, tell it to the client, and we hope we win the deal. That's how the business started. In 2003, Meridian kind of changed that. The Co-op City had to go through a massive reconstruction, massive. And they came to us, they needed $480 million. So that's not a loan that you go to a bank and say, what's your rate? We went to a number of banks and said, we need these 5 features. We need 5 things that you're not really offering now that you could offer. We need these 5 features to be the rate lock day one. We don't want yield maintenance penalty. We want a sliding scale penalty. We want 30-360, not actual 360. We want an unsecured credit line. We want the ability to pay back some of the money if we borrow too much. We want to be able to pay back a certain percentage per year of money without a penalty. These are the types of things that we needed. Nobody was offering them. $480 million, the bank went out of their way, and they gave us these 5 things. Little did they know that the owner of the company was going to take these 5 things and offer it on every $1 million co-op for the rest of the time, which is exactly what we did. That lender, it changed the whole, up until then, there were 2 banks that were basically selling an agency loan, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which really are, not even arguably, really are the worst types of loans for co-ops. An agency execution with a spread that you can't lock for 6 weeks, with yield maintenance, with restrictions on additional financing, where you can't pay down. If you took out too much money, you're stuck with it, you gotta pay the interest. It's literally the worst types of loans, and you'd be surprised the lenders that are still trying to get you guys to sign on that. This particular product was, we duplicated it with a second bank. And then now, and in fact, some of the banks are here in the audience with us, there's, I think, 8 different lenders that have a variation of that particular portfolio product. And it's obviously been successful because instead of Meridian going to the bank and saying, what's your rate? We went to the bank and said, this is what we need because this is what you needed. And there's no better way to kind of approach a new client than to say, I can do things for you that really you didn't even think that you could get. We've since, about 7 years ago, we spoke with one of our life insurance companies because people still want longer term deals, 15, 20, 25, 30-year deals. I'm not even following this. All right, we'll get to it in a second. We went to one of our life company deals because people still want 25 and 30-year loans. The problem with a 30-year loan on a co-op is, well, first of all, co-op boards change. Your needs change. Local law 11 can really create a fire drill in the co-op, and stress and aggravation that, because you got to raise money quickly. You don't want to assess. You don't want to borrow. It's a nightmare. So we went to this one life company and we said, we need, on the long-term deal, I need to lock the rate at the beginning of the process, which we got within the first week. And I need to be able to come back to you in a 30-year term 5 times for additional money. It's an average of every 6 years. That's better than a 10-year course, right, if you're taking 10-year mortgages. So we need to be able to come back 5 times. And let's say you guys decide you're not lending on real estate anymore. You need to let the co-op go to any bank they want for subordinate financing. We also need to amend your yield maintenance prepayment penalty and make it kinder and gentler. And they wound up doing that. They added a 0.5 point to the reinvestment rate, which lowers your yield maintenance by 0.5 point per year, or brings the reinvestment up to the mortgage rate, which means you wouldn't have a yield maintenance. The point is, we're up here because we took the volume that we do, which sounds impressive to us, The reason it's impressive to you is that we took it and used it to your benefit, which benefits us as well. But in other words, being able to deliver to you guys the types of products that no one else really can. Okay, so you've been hearing the term historically low rates for 20 years. I mean, I'm with the company 21 years. I came, my first day, he handed me a bunch of co-op leads. He says, call them and tell them you have 7.25% money, which I didn't know what a co-op was. I didn't know what 7.25% good or bad, and we learned eventually. But ever since then, since the mid-90s, the rates have been coming down pretty steadily. Although the trend is starting to turn around, things that you can do in a low-rate environment are really remarkable, and we'll talk about it just because of how interest works. This is the 10-year Treasury. Commercial mortgages are all based in one way or another off the 10-year Treasury. Okay, so we see in the 80s. I mean, look, the 55 years. We're not, we didn't put the dates, but in the early 80s is when it spiked, and you can see from those two mountains over the last 30 years, we've seen a slow, and a gradual decline, which has been very good for anybody borrowing money. But if we, oh man, all right, I'm sorry about the text, gets a little misformatted. If you step through the decades, you kind of see a different story. You start from the 80s, right, where it starts to come down. But if you look at every 10-year period, it's important for you to understand that that general impression that rates have been coming down for 30 years, not really the whole story. Because in every 10-year period, you see, there are highs and lows. And there's a big gap in between the high rate and the low rate. In other words, from 1990 to 99, the rate was as high as 9% and as low as 4.16. So depending on when you refinanced in the 90s, you could have been almost 5% from the high to the low. 2000 to 2010, it's the same thing. We've been hearing low rates, but the truth is, in that 10-year period, there was a 4.7% difference between the high and the low. So timing of your refinancing, timing of your rate lock, it's really important. Even in the last 8 years, it's 3.75% depending on when you refinance. Now we're going to go a little deeper here. This is the 10-year T-bill the last 5 years, and it's broken down by year. So you can see that even within every year, 2013 it was 1.4%, 2014 1.14, 2015 was 0.87, which again, if you're on the wrong side of that, it's a very big negative impact. 2016, we had another pretty big dip and another rise, and just that 1 year, there was a 1.25% difference between the high and the low. 2017 was pretty much flat, still 0.557 basis points. So the important thing is, again, when you get ready to do a refinance, when you can lock your rate is more important than the rate itself. If you have two loans that you're considering, and one loan is 4% and the other loan's 4.25%, so like the first thing, we're going to think, well, the 4% is a better deal. But the 4% bank that's offering you 4%, you can't lock the rate for 6 weeks. They have to do the appraisal, the environmental, the engineering. They have to generate a commitment. They got to give the commitment to the lawyer. The lawyer has to modify it, negotiate the changes. By the time all of that's done, it's 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. In those 4 to 6 weeks, your rate's going to change every single day because it's a spread over the Treasury. So your 4% rate that you can't lock for 6 weeks, probably not as good as 4.25% that you could lock today and sleep for the next 6 weeks. And it's not 0.25%. I mean, I'm using that as an example, but we wouldn't suggest you pay that much. Let's talk for a second about different kinds of lenders. Again, when co-op boards, because you're largely not hardcore finance people, and I got to tell you, most hardcore finance people don't even know this. there are 5 different types of lenders. Forget 5 banks. There are 5 groups of banks that are lending money on co-ops. Okay, there's life insurance companies. The agency lenders are the government-sponsored entities, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. CMBS, which commercial mortgage-backed securities, they're the guys that can offer you sometimes a very, very good rate with very onerous terms. Can't lock your rate until really almost the end of the process. They wind up selling the loan into some diversified investment portfolio, and if you're happy with the loan for 10 years, don't expect to come back and to change it in any way. CMBS is only about the rate, and if you feel that you'll never need any money during the term. Portfolio lenders are the local savings banks. They're the guys that lend you the money, their money, that for their depositors. They hold the loan for the entire term. Whatever you need during the term, there's always somebody at the bank that will address your needs. If you need to refinance, to borrow more money, or whatever it is, they'll negotiate your prepayment penalty for you. They're not yield maintenance, it's a sliding scale, which we'll go through a little bit soon. Yield maintenance, we're going to go through yield maintenance in a second. And the other type of bank is the swap lender. If you guys saw The Big Short, you'll understand how, I want to say shady, but just how opportunistic investors have made real estate finance today. That a real estate a mortgage on your property, on a co-op, is specifically a co-op. Of all the different types of real estate that can get financing, the co-op is the safest real estate mortgage that you can make because it's your home. It's not one investor that can lose money someplace else and stop paying this loan. The shareholders are running the show. Co-ops never default. They never go bankrupt. They never disband. It's really the safest, and the best part is that you're on average 10% loan to value. And I have lenders here, and some of our lenders. And when I first talk to a new lender, I always say the same thing. I say the biggest risk, because banks are all about risk, the biggest risk to lending to a co-op is that it won't default. Because if it defaults, you get a beautiful building for 10 cents on the dollar. If it doesn't default, you got to wait every month for your money. So, which is what they're actually happy with. So, the swap lenders, they're the investment people. To them, a mortgage is just a way to earn a little bit of interest. They wind up taking the loan and selling it into a pool of other loans, and the swap and the CMBS. It's a very interesting. There's more technicalities to it that you're not interested in, but it's the reason that the swap and the CMBS a little bit lower rate. It's because they don't want to be bothered. They don't want to hear from you for the next 10 years. Just pay the thing. They don't care if you need more money. They don't care if you need what. It's not something that co-ops really find appealing. So let's go through these lenders. Securitizing lenders, okay. Securitizing lenders are the agency, the CMBS, and the swap. And what securitizing means is after you close the loan, they bundle your loans with a bunch of other loans and they sell it to the teacher's pension fund, to a Wall Street diversified portfolio. They sell the loans. They don't hold the loans. Life insurance companies, it's very interesting. Life companies will take, let's say you have a 20-year-old couple that wants life insurance, so they know that they're going to live for 30 years. So they'll take those premiums of 20-year-old life insurance that they're getting paid, and they'll put it on a 30-year mortgage, right? Because they're not going to need the money for 30 years. They're very smart guys. The life insurance actuaries really are the smartest guys in real estate lending. They hold on to the loan for the entire term, and they're very, very helpful. We're going to go through the life company, the benefits of a life deal, but that's for a little bit larger loans, $7 million and above, and their strength is the longer terms, 15 to 30 years. The portfolio lenders, like we said, some of the community banks, they understand the real estate, and they hold on to the loans. They have flexible penalties, flexible features, and we'll go through some of that. So that's the difference between the securitizing lenders are a little bit cheaper, but have much harsher terms and conditions. Okay, we went through kind of some of this. That that our success that you don't care about is that we took our volume and we used it to convince lenders to do things that they didn't know they should do to begin with. In terms of financing, these are the different types of products. This is an interesting chart because this shows you all your different options. We have everything from 5-year interest only to 30 years interest only, and everything in between. You can get 5 years on a 10-year amortization, on a 40-year amortization, you get 10 years on any amortization you want. There really should be 10-year self-liquidating, because that's why it's okay. It's 10-year self-liquidating is there. All right, so any of these combinations of loans we offer, I think it's 48, did I count them somewhere? 48 choices, but really there's a lot more than this, because within this chart, we can structure your loan, okay, that will further address the needs that you have. And I'll give you an example of structure, and we've done this many times, and it's a different way to look at loans. Let's say you're borrowing money. Let's say you're on a 30-year amortization right now, and you're borrowing new money, and hey Joe, and you're borrowing more money. Now, if you borrow more money, you're likely to increase your debt service, and you're likely going to have to increase your maintenance to cover the debt service, okay, because you got to balance your budget. So what we've shown co-ops that need significant money is, instead of borrowing an extra $1 million or an extra $2 million, borrow a little bit less. Borrow less, because you don't need the money up front. Most times you do work, it's over a 12-month or 24-month period. Borrow less money and take 2 years interest only, which will lower your payments, but you're going to budget as though you took the 30-year amortization for the whole time. So you're going to collect the maintenance that you're going to need to balance your budget, but those first 2 years, you're going to generate reserve profit that you didn't have to borrow. So instead of borrowing, you could borrow, let's say, $500,000 less. You'll make that $500,000 in the first 2 years, and we can show you numbers. I mean, it's been very popular. You don't have to amortize in the first 2 years because you borrowed the $500,000 less to begin with, so that interest only doesn't hurt you. But the beauty of it is that if you don't want to set your maintenance to where the actual payment's going to be starting year 3, you can ramp it up. Over the first 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, you can ramp up a maintenance increase over a longer period instead of just hitting people all at once with the maintenance increase to cover the additional money. And that increase will be less because you borrowed less money. So that's one of the ways to structure a loan that, again, really nobody else talks about. We talked about flexible prepayment penalties. You guys, most of you, if you're familiar with prepayment penalties, you're probably familiar with yield maintenance. And yield maintenance, we're going to talk about what that is in a second. It's basically a way of having you pay all the interest that you owe on the loan, even though you're paying off the loan a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years early. As I told you the story, in 2003, when we went to the bank to do the Co-op City loan, we got them to give us a sliding scale penalty. Instead of yield maintenance, the penalty, if you refinance in the first 2 years, it would be 5% of the balance. The next 2 years, 4, then 3, 5, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1. The last 5 years, when you would most likely want to refinance, your penalty is 3%, 2%, 2%, 1%, 1%. So that really was a much more humane way to treat a co-op, because you guys don't do things spitefully. You do things that you need to do, and you need to respond to any kind of capital need. And the prepayment penalty shouldn't be a punishment for you to just take care of your own building. We've refined the original 5544 penalty, and now I think just about every bank today is at a different 333, 222, 111, and then 0 the last year. So those are the examples of sliding scale prepayment penalties. And the portfolio lenders that offer this, if you, did you get a tissue? Thank you. If you do the portfolio loan that has even the sliding scale penalty, and it's, let's say you have 2% penalty and you have to refinance, the banks will always cut your penalty at least in half. depending on the situation, they'll cut your penalty in half. So that's something that the securitized lenders can't do because they don't hold the loan anymore. There's some investor paid for the loan, and he has to get his interest. One second. So that's another strength of the portfolio banks. Okay, so let's go through yield maintenance because it's important for you to understand how it works. We'll take a case, a $2 million loan at 6% interest only. It started in 2010 and it's coming due in April of 2020, so there's 24 months left. The annual payment's $120,000. So the way yield maintenance is calculated is they say, okay, you're going to pay me back my 6% loan. With 2 years left, I expected to get the interest for 10 full years. It's only 8. I'm going to buy a 2-year T-bill. I'm going to buy a T-bill with the matching maturity of the loan. If the 2-year T-bill pays the same 6% that the mortgage is paying, then you don't owe me anything. But if the 2-year T-bill pays less, you have to pay the difference. You have to maintain the yield. That's yield maintenance. So let's, for the example, and the rates aren't accurate, but the math is what we're trying to get here. Let's say that the mortgage rate was 6%, and let's say that the 2-year T-bill is 4%. So that means there's a 2% difference per year that you have to make up. So your prepayment penalty in this case would be 4% of the loan amount, less the future value of that, the present value of that, which really isn't going to be that much lower because rates are very low. But you get the idea. The basic idea is that your penalty with 2 years left would be 4%. Now you compare that to the sliding scale, and in the worst, the 333-222-1110, your penalty would be 1% with 2 years left. And that penalty could be cut in half, or actually maybe wiped out if you're refinancing with the same bank. So refinancing the loan today, if let's say now you're going to refinance that 6% loan with a new 10-year loan at 4%, because that's where, let's say rates today, 10 years interest only. I did this presentation last Thursday so they could print it, and since last Thursday, rates are up about 15 basis points. So we're just using numbers here. But let's say you could finance, I could still get you 4% today for 10 years interest only. Your payments would go down from, with the swap, relax. Your payments would go down from $120,000 a year to $80,000 a year. So you'd be saving $40,000 over the term, per year, $400,000 over the term. Your penalty was 4% of the $2 million, so your penalty to get out of the loan was $80,000, but you're saving $40,000 a year, so you're going to make that up by the time the loan would have matured. So you're going to refinance, you'll get the new money you need, you lock in the low rate, and by the time that old loan would have matured, you paid back the penalty. Or another way of taking advantage of the fact that your rate today is lower than it was is that you could take out a new loan of $3 million, you could cash out $1 million, and at 4%, your annual payment would stay at $120,000. Did you guys all catch that? Because this is the way of taking advantage of rates. We're used to saying, oh, a lower rate, I'll save money, but you don't always have to. Your goal is not always to save money if you need money. So if you need money, there's a way to take advantage of rates to get more money without paying more for it. So that's the way to look at yield maintenance. So that's what we said. So it's a way so yield maintenance is a way of calculating the loss. They don't really buy treasuries. Like in other words, when they say, well, we're going to look at the treasury, but they don't really buy it. They just take your money and then they wind up taking all the money that you pay back, including the penalty, and lending it to somebody else. But there's a form of yield maintenance called defeasance that they actually do swap the building with treasuries. In other words, the building is collateral on the loan stays in effect, they swap the building as collateral with treasuries of the equal amount with the equal time, and that's called defeasance. So the defeasance penalty is the same as yield maintenance, but the administrative cost to record all of these changes on all these treasuries and take out the building and put in the treasuries would cost between $60,000 and $100,000 of added onto your penalty. Okay, that's the bad part of defeasance. Defeasance has a better side to it, and that is if the rate on the new loan, or if rates today are higher than you were paying, where the bank's going to make money on that 2-year T-bill, then the profit that they're going to make because the rate's higher than your mortgage rate, they deduct the present value of that profit from the amount you owe them. So you wind up saving a little money. Okay, that sounds good, but the net effect is rates are higher, which means your new mortgage rate's higher, which you don't beat the house. That's the sad part. Why would you consider a loan with defeasance penalty? Okay, the only reason to consider a loan with yield maintenance or defeasance is if the rate is that much better, you have a ton of reserve money, you get a ton of flip tax income, and you really don't think you're going to have to go back to the bank and ask them for anything. All right, so then you can take the low rate, you're financially secure, you're set up for 10 years, and that's fine. And if that's where you're at, by the way, we're here for you. I mean, you know, there's plenty of options, plenty of lenders, the swap lenders that can get you really the absolute best possible deals today. Has it ever happened where the rate, in other words, has it ever happened when in a defeasance loan that the rates were higher when you paid it off than they were when you borrowed the loan? So you remember the chart went like this. So that chart since 1982 or 83 was if you take a 10-year slider and you just move the 10-year slider anywhere along that chart, the rate at the beginning of the 10 years was always higher than at the end of the 10 years. So there's never been a case where your rate at the beginning of 10 years was low and at the end of 10 years was high so that you got a discount on the defeasance. It's never happened yet. Could, but it hasn't yet. When was the last year? So 3.8% interest rate. When was the last year that the 2-year T-bill was 3.8%? It was October 2007. So it's not really within an 8-year period anymore, but you see that it's been a while since rates have been that high. Okay, taking advantage of today's rates. Because rates are still low, even though we are in the last year, look, the things that affect treasuries, before the crash, treasuries competed for investment dollars with the stock market. And when I joined the company 21 years ago, the saying was, bad news for the stock market is good news for interest rate. If the stock market drops, the yield on the treasury drops because if the stock market drops, people leave and they buy treasuries. It's a safer bet. The more treasuries are bought, the lower the yield goes because it's supply and demand. Good news for the stock market means people take their money out of treasuries, they put it into the stock market, so the yield on the treasury goes up. The cost of the treasury goes down, but the yield goes up. So that used to be the way it kind of always worked. It's not anymore. Now treasuries are more connected to international events, economic events, and they're much more local. In other words, they're much more as it happens. Right now, well, there's many reasons why the stock market has been going crazy in the last few years. Interest rates, as soon as interest rates started going up, the interest on our debt's going to go up, and that's going to affect the economy in a negative way, and that's why if it affects the economy in a negative way, it's going to affect business in a negative way, and that's going to lower the stock market. Now, I'll be honest with you, when I have questions about where things are going, the only guys we ask are the life insurance guys because they're insane numbers people. They can tell me when I'm going to die, basically. So those are the guys to ask your questions. If you don't have that, your responsibility as board members is you find the best possible deal today. If rates go up in 6 months, if they go down in 6 months, you have to do the best thing you can today, which means going to all 5 lending types, getting the right deal that has the features you need, and that's really the best thing you could do. Okay, I went off the script again. Okay, let's talk for a second about, okay. One thing that you guys have to divorce yourself from when you're considering financing, and the biggest mistake that co-op boards make is they consider your underlying loan the same as your residential loan because they're both mortgages. They're both mortgages on a co-op. So you think, well, I have a 30-year loan on my unit. I need a 30-year loan on my co-op. I want to be mortgage-free on my unit, so we should be mortgage-free on the co-op. So I'll tell you that it's completely not related. Of the top 10 things that you as a board member need to focus on in your co-op, the top 10 objectives, responsibilities that you have, being mortgage-free is not on that list. The number one objective of every co-op board member, number one priority, is to maintain and increase the value of the units. That's it. Okay? And now, to do that, you have to keep reinvesting in the co-op. To keep reinvesting and maintaining the co-op, you need money. So it doesn't mean you need runaway debt, that your debt, your mortgage should keep going up and up. But let me explain to you one interesting thing about mortgages, a very interesting thing on mortgages on co-ops specifically. Residential mortgage is a little bit different. There's an amortization effect to real estate that you really don't have with a lot of other things. And what that means is, if you look at any 10-year period, obviously 20 or 30, but let's look at every 10-year period, two things happen to real estate. In 10 years, it might go like this, but the value of your units will be higher at the end of 10 years than at the beginning. So the value of your real estate goes up, and the value of the money goes down. So I call that like the amortization effect of real estate. If you have a $2 million loan today, and you take it for 10 years interest only, and your $2 million balance will be in 10 years, you're going to say, well, I have the same amount. No, because that $2 million is a much lower percentage. The amount of your mortgage is not the important thing. It's the percentage of the debt to the value of the building. You want to stay under 25% loan to value, which means if your building is worth $10 million, $2.5 million loan is probably the most you want. If it's worth $100 million, $25 million loan is probably where you want to be. And again, if you're at that level, then worrying about reducing the actual dollar amount of your loan isn't as important as protecting your financial needs along the way. If you don't have a bunch of assessments that make people crazy, and it really assessments and irregular maintenance increases hurt the value of your units. So this is what we call this amortization effect. And we go through numbers here. $2 million in 2007 is worth $1,725,000 in 2017. So that's a way that just explains to you how money kind of amortizes itself. Okay. And likewise, the value of the units over a similar period goes up, went up in New York significantly. So you had the value of the dollars went down 8.6%, and the value of the real estate in Manhattan went up 41%. So that all worked in your favor. Your property is worth 40% more. The money that you owe is worth 8% less. So you're in better shape at the end of the term than you were at the beginning, even if you have interest only. You should look this. If you guys are interested in this, Douglas Elliman has a very extensive market research stuff on their website. We used some of that. Okay. Now, refinancing today at a lower rate than you're paying now is a way of taking advantage of today's rates, right? That's a no-brainer. But are there other ways? But that only helps you for those 10 years, right? In other words, if you're paying 6% and now you can pay 4%, so now you're saving 2% for the next 10 years. But how can you leverage today's low rates for longer than 10 years? There's got to be more that we could do to kind of help the co-op along the way. All right, I'm going to let you read all this yourself, but there's a chart here that's really helpful. One of the ways to benefit the co-op from today's low rates is by adjusting and modifying your amortization schedule. So let me show you what I mean. If you currently have an interest-only loan that's at 5% or higher, if your rate's 501 or higher, you could take your current balance and refinance it on a 40-year amortization track, which means you're going to start paying down principal, and your debt service doesn't go up. That's because 5% current rate. Rates are lower today. You could now switch over to a 40-year amortization. If you are now on a 40-year amortization and your rate's 492 or higher, you could go to a 30-year amortization, accelerate your principal pay down, and not raise your debt service. And if you're on a 30-year amortization at 4.85%, you could go to a 25-year amortization. And again, in 10 years from now, you're going to owe a lot less money. And you know what that means? Rates could be higher, and it won't hurt you for two reasons. If you go from an interest-only loan to a 40, or let's say you're at 573 interest-only, you can go to a 30-year amortization. So let me tell you what you're doing. This is very interesting. It really is interesting. If you go to from interest only to a 30-year amortization, you're going to pay down about 18 or 20% of your loan balance in 10 years. At the end of 10 years, rates could be 2% higher, 2.5% higher, because your balance is lower. It's not going to hit you. If it's higher than 2.5%, 2.5%, you could go back to an interest-only loan. You have that option to lower your debt service. So if you're on interest only now, going to even a 40-year amortization would help you, but getting on a more aggressive amortization track will protect the co-op in 10 years if rates actually do spike, because you're going to owe less money, and you have the option to go back to the longer amortization or the interest only. Okay. This is my favorite. Since I've 21 years, every single co-op asks the same question. We have a board member that wants a 30-year self-liquidating. He wants to be mortgage-free in 30 years. So, God, the years keep going. So I remind them, if you took a 30-year self-liquidating loan in 1988, I think it was 1978 when we started this, or if you took it in 1988 alone, just guys, think about where you were in 1988. If you took a 30-year self-liquidating loan in 1988, it comes due this year. How much money has the co-op needed since 1988 to deal with the things you needed? So the answer is a lot. And what you wind up doing is, yeah, you could pay off today's balance, but 30 years from now, you're still going to have a balance because you're going to have to borrow along the way. So we wound up trying to talk people out of 30-year loans because the loans themselves didn't make sense. And if some of you, and I know some of you have long-term loans that you regret, okay, and I'll tell you why you regret it. You needed money along the way that the bank wouldn't give you. So if they won't give it to you, you need to try to get out of the loan, to go to a loan, to borrow the new money, and the bank won't let you out of a long-term loan incredibly onerous penalties, the yield maintenance penalties for 15, 20 years, whatever is left. So we talked a lot of you guys out of the 30-year loans. Fannie Mae was very big on really the only source was Fannie Mae for a long time. And about 7 years ago, we went to one of our life insurance relationships, and we said we need 2 or 3 features. We need a better yield maintenance. We need the ability, most important, a 30-year deal. I need to come back to you 5 times during 30 years, and you have to give me the ability to come to you 5 times over 30 years for additional money if I need it. Okay, based on a LTV cap that's in the documents, let's say 30%, 35%, whatever we can negotiate. Imagine 30-year loan where you have complete access to additional money on average every 6 years, which is better than a 10-year term, 10-year track. We got a yield maintenance, and better than that, let's say they stop lending money. Let's say they go life insurance. It's never happened, and these life insurance companies are 100 years old, if not more. But let's say something happens, they stop lending on real estate, they need to give you the right to go to any bank you want for subordinate financing. We got that from them. So now that's a 30-year product that we can deal with. With the life insurance execution, the application is 48, 50 pages because it has all of the commitment language. all the language you would get in a normal commitment from any other bank is in the application. So your lawyer is going to negotiate the application as though it were the commitment. The actual commitment is a letter saying you're approved. I mean, and they restate the whole thing. But everything is negotiated up front. The beauty of that is that once your lawyer looks at the application and he gives his list of demands and they get negotiated and everybody's happy, you can lock your rate. First week, 10 days, and which is, we said, locking the rate is more important than the rate itself. So imagine, you have a long-term loan, you can lock the rate at the beginning of the process versus the agency loans that you can't lock until about 6 weeks later, until the actual commitment comes. You have a better, kinder, gentler form of prepayment penalty, the yield maintenance, where they add a half a point to the reinvestment rate, so it'll save you. I think we discussed that. The life companies, instead of, you remember the case where it was a 6% rate and a 4% treasury? So on the life insurance version of this, they would add a half a point to that 4%. So instead of the difference being 2% per year, it'd be 1.5% per year. So it saves you a half a point per year. Or let's say your rate is 6, and let's say that the corresponding treasury is 5.5. That half a point will bring the yield of what they call the reinvestment rate up to your lending rate, and you have no yield maintenance penalty. It's just the 1% minimum default penalty. So that's a very important feature for us and for you, which is why we got it done. And the ability to get additional money, guys, is key for the long term. They will do amazing things, the life companies, because they'll do what we said, 30 years, let's say you want 30 years self-liquidating, and let's say you need to borrow an extra $5 million. They'll give you 30 years self-liquidating where you get 5 years interest only to pocket some money that you're gonna, right? You're gonna buy, instead of borrowing it, you pocket it, and then in the beginning of the 6th year, it'll be a 25-year self-liquidating. So you think that's a little bit higher, but it's really not so bad because you borrowed less money, so it'll be comparable. Borrowing less money is key because you want to borrow, as a co-op, you want to borrow as little as you can, but you still need the proceeds. Borrowing less money up front, getting a few years of interest only, we can do that with the life companies. We can structure any kind of thing like that. In fact, they're even more sophisticated than that. We can split the loan into 2 pieces. One could be 30 years self-liquidating, one could be 10 years interest only, one piece, and you can play with it that way, really any way you want to. The key is looking at rates today, and again, look at the actual rates because we're a couple basis points higher, but the most amazing thing is if you look at a schedule of a 30-year self-liquidating loan today, you probably remember 20 years ago, the big thing, people bragged about getting a 15-year self-liquidating loan. You guys remember like when people would talk about, oh, they got, we couldn't afford it because 15-year self-liquidating was a higher payment per month because you're paying off the loan in 15 years. But why did everybody want it? Because the actual interest you pay over 15 years is probably half of what you pay over the 30 years, probably less than half. So that's why they didn't want to pay interest. People won't pay interest. So they'll take the 15-year self-liquidating, they'll pay a little bit more every month, but they're paid off in 15 years. If you look at, we call the footprint, the interest footprint of a 30-year loan at today's rates, the actual amount of interest that you pay in the 4.25% range is comparable to a 15-year self-liquidating when the rates were 6.5%, 7%. So it gives you amazing flexibility and options to consider things you may not have considered in the past, just because the math it just really allows a lot of flexibility. We went through this, subordinate financing, and that's basically the story. So now, I'm sorry, I should have done this at the beginning. Nicoletta Pagnotta, anyone who's worked with Meridian knows Nicoletta. I'm that salesman that promises you everything, right? That you can't believe what I'm promising you, and she's the one who makes sure it happens. She works for a living. And this is Avi. Avi is number 1 son and been with us 8 years, and besides being very successful, steals a lot of my business, but what am I going to do? He's got 2 little girls, which make me very happy. If you guys have any questions for any of us, just raise your hands. Really? Yes, sir.
The concept is if you have a mortgage, interest rates are going to go up, but your yield to maintenance penalty will go down.
Or away.
Right. But then when you're financing at a higher rate.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Our approach to long-term loans, it's not that. That's trying to take advantage of the loop. Our goal to giving you a long-term loan is that you keep that long-term loan for the full term. And the way you do that is make sure you have access to money and make sure that you can get what you need. That's really the name of the game. So because you're right, if you have to get out of a long-term loan because you need more money that you can't get, it doesn't help anybody. Even if rates go up and your penalty goes down, you're screwed the other way because you're paying a higher rate. And if the rates are low, you're paying a much higher penalty, you're adding it to the, so it's almost like your rate's higher because you're on a much more debt. So the key to a long-term loan, when you come to us, we make sure that you're in a position to, now, let me tell you something. Maintenance increases, regular maintenance increases, whether you need it or not, and I can't stress this enough. The biggest problem that we find co-ops get into is if the first thing a co-op board member says to us is, we haven't had a maintenance increase in 7 years. What does that mean? Nothing good. Nothing good. That is never something to brag about. You need maintenance increases to kind of keep everybody online, on par with the rest of the co-ops that you're competing with, and to make sure that people understand that it takes money to maintain the co-op. So that's very important. That's another way that you keep a long-term loan is by making sure that you have.
How much is the inflationary increase? 2%?
It's whatever it is, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in terms of.
The regular annual maintenance increase percentage.
Oh, well, I would say a minimum, what would be a minimum, 2%? I'll make sure it's on. She said she would talk to your management company about it, what they see, and make them explain it to you. In other words, don't just say, what should we increase maintenance every year? Come up with a plan. But you don't want. Assessments are tricky, though. Assessments. No. See, I don't live in a co-op, but I would imagine that assessments are really kind of arbitrarily painful. They're because a maintenance increase you can plan for, right? An assessment means you weren't managed well. An assessment means something crept up on us, something took us by surprise, and now you got to pay for it.
Before they approve the budget, they give you either 6% maintenance option or assessment against the tax, which is no longer going to be
Going to work, exactly.
available.
Right.
So people who just bought don't get the benefit.
Right.
Only people who bought a year ago registered.
Okay, but the people who just buy aren't, they're happy with the, you know what I'm saying? So they're, yeah, that's the nature of every co-op, though, that new buyers have their own reasons to be satisfied, I guess, right? Because they bought in.
But even with this assessment, you still recommend the maintenance because of this coverage.
I recommend a maintenance increase. She's saying that they would assess, the co-ops would assess against tax abatements, which are obviously thrown in crazy flux right now. But what you got to manage it. If you have a major assessment, you could take it easy on a maintenance increase that year. You know what I'm saying? Like if there is, you don't know what you're going to get back. So yeah, I would say 2%. If you don't need it, 1.5%, 2%. I mean, but talk to your manager. But again, you need to make sure you're prepared. That's all. The worst in the world is you have a little extra money in your reserve account. That's never hurt anybody, you know? Yes, sir.
Do you see any changes in recent tax law changes?
Yeah, here the question is, do I see any changes in the tax law? I'm paying more in taxes. Right. Okay, so that's a very interesting question. Let me tell you why. The question is, how do the tax laws changing affect co-ops? So I'm going to tell you one major effect. Prepayment penalties, whether they're the 321, 54321, or the yield maintenance, are all considered prepaid interest, right? So in other words, every prepayment penalty is considered prepaid interest for accounting purposes, and you were able to deduct, used to be you could deduct the whole prepayment penalty, huge. Then they said, well, you can only deduct up to, I think it was the amount of interest that you paid in the last year. And that amount of prepayment penalty you can deduct. Now you got to talk to your accountant, for sure. And I have no idea how it's going to, and if I had an idea, I still wouldn't tell you. You got to talk to the professionals. Anybody else?
Do you foresee interest rates going up?
What's my answer? What's my answer? Do I foresee interest rates going up? I'm going to tell you what I've told people for 20 years. I would rather give you tomorrow's lottery numbers than tell you what rates are going to be. I don't have that, and I don't have this. You don't have to, as a co-op board, don't get into that. Don't get into speculation. This isn't an investment that you're making. Your mortgage is the lifeblood of your co-op. The structure, how you structure your underlying financing depends on, you rely on that for your budget, for everything, for your maintenance. You need to make the best decision today based on the current information. If rates go down a little bit afterwards, they could have gone up. If they go up, you're not responsible for what happens after that. If your needs are today. I will tell you, a lot of people are anticipating rates going up. Like I said, I try to get my life insurance friends to tell me what they think. They don't always tell me, but because they're, like I said, they're the ones that tell me when I'm going to get a spot on my tie. But nobody knows. And I'm going to tell you something else, sir. If anybody answers that question, walk the other way. And that's the bottom line. Nobody knows the answer to where rates are going to be. And I hate the people who think they do. We've been saying that for 20 years. We've been saying historically low rates for 20 years. We don't say it anymore. But yeah, there are indications now. But I got news for you. If the House changes, if the Senate changes, if the presidency changes, that's going to affect the economy, and that could bring us back to where we've been. We're not going to talk about politics. Anybody? Condos. No.
Hello? Are these, is
Come
this
talk
on?
about condos.
We just want
Yes,
to mention,
I don't know anything
I know
about
most of you
condos.
are probably here for co-op financing, but we do also make loans to condo associations, which a lot of people don't know.
We have
Are there
the
condos?
yeah, for condos we have the best condo products available. Condos typically, when you want to borrow money, it's always because of an upcoming capital project, a roof, a local 11, a boiler, elevator, whatever. Some projects coming up, and rather than do an upfront immediate assessment, which nobody likes to do, condos typically have to go and borrow. So the needs for the condo would be a short-term building project, whether it's a year or 6 months, 18 months, 2 years to draw the money that they need, and then repay it, pay it off as quickly as possible. So we have lenders that'll do a 2+10, where it'll give you a 2-year draw, like a credit line, but the rate is fixed up front at 5%, whatever the rate is today, and they'll give you 2 years to draw that money at the same rate, followed by, once you're done drawing, the next 10 years to pay it off at the same rate.
The 2 years means you don't have to pay interest on the money you don't need. You're paying the interest as you're spending the money.
Right. It's draw as you need, pay as you go, and after the 2 years, you pay it off over 10 years. It's a very condo-friendly product. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Thank you. For a condo? For the condo, depending on the loan, it depends on the loan size, but it's not that expensive because there's no mortgage tax. $500,000? How much? $500,000, 15, 20,000 all in, not including your attorney. It's not expensive because there's no mortgage tax. There's not really so many other fees involved because it's not recorded. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Guys, thank you very much.